Welcome to Command Control Power, a weekly podcast hosted by 3 certified members of the Apple Consultants Network, drawing from over half a century of combined experience. We talk shop, interview vendors and colleagues, and share what we've learned while operating our technology consulting practices. This is Joe Saponare of CyMac, and my 2 co-hosts are Jerry Zigmont of MacWorks and Sam Valencia of the HCS Technology Group. Hey everybody, it's our 9th anniversary. That's right, we've been recording Command Control Power every week since June 2013. We hope you've enjoyed it. On this special occasion of 9 years running, we're trying a little experiment for the next month or 2. We have a great community of supporters on Patreon, and we really want to show them how much we appreciate their support. So this summer, we're airing new shows every week in the private patron-only subscription. Here on the public show, we'll re-air a classic episode from our catalog of almost 500 episodes, along with the occasional new show. For the freshest content, a peek behind the scenes, and more candid conversation about running our businesses, dealing with clients, fixing tough technical issues, and everything else you love about Command Control Power, we invite you to join us on Patreon so you don't miss any of this great content. Go to commandcontrolpower.com and click support. Pledge monthly, and you can instantly subscribe to the weekly patron-only shows right in your favorite podcast app. We are very pleased this week to be joined by Erin Burry, Managing Director at 88 Agency. Thanks for joining us, Erin.
Thanks for having me, guys.
We got to see you ACES, the ACES conference that just wrapped up last month out in Phoenix, and you gave a talk on basically building your personal brand, something that I think a lot of Apple consultants don't spend a whole lot of time doing. But to kind of start, I was curious, what was it like attending and, of course, speaking at a conference, being surrounded by Apple consultants who do this for a living? I mean, you don't have the technical background that we have, but you're kind of coming at it from a different angle. What was that like to be in a room full of geeks, basically?
Well, I'm used to that. I mean, I've been working in I'd like to think I'm a bit of a geek myself, and I've been working in the startup and technology space for the last decade. So I actually met Justin, the organizer of ACES, and himself an Apple consultant years and years ago, and we've stayed connected online. So he invited me to speak, and obviously I jumped at the chance to go to Phoenix in the springtime since I'm from Toronto, and as you know, probably Canada is very cold. So I was excited to go to Phoenix for the weather, but also just for the conference because, I own an agency, and as a marketing person, it doesn't matter what services you're marketing, but if you're in the services business, you do have to think about your personal brand. So whether you're an Apple consultant or you're selling insurance or you're a PR or marketing person, you really do have to think about personal branding. So it was fun to be in that room because I think everyone was really receptive to it. I mean, we were chatting before the show started about how, Apple consultants are great at what they do, but they might not always be thinking about how do I actually drive more leads? How do I market my business? So I think everyone in the room was really receptive to it and seemed to enjoy it, even though it was outside of maybe the typical content you get at a conference like that.
For sure. Yeah, it was a strong start to the conference. It was a great conference. ACES is known to focus more on the business around technology consulting, not so much on the tech. Your talk was definitely a good start to that on that theme. I'm curious, you refer to this as personal branding, personal brand. How is that sort of distinct from, your company brand?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you can absolutely have a really strong company brand, and you should have a really strong company brand. Even if you're a solo consultant, you probably have an incorporated name like MacWorks, and it's not your actual personal name. So unless you're Erin Burry Inc., you have a company brand, and you should sit down and have a marketing strategy for that company. What kind of content are we creating, and how are we driving people to our website? But when you're an entrepreneur, you often have this personal brand that's tied to your individual name, and that's because when you're an entrepreneur, you are the chief salesperson for your business. You're the chief, marketer. You're the chief everything, and you're the one out shaking hands. And when we think about a lot of the prominent, famous entrepreneurs like Richard Branson or Jack Dorsey from Square or Mark Zuckerberg, they not only have a brand for their companies. If you think of Virgin, you think of pushing the envelope and really fun brand. You can think of all the words that come to mind when you say the brand, but you can say all of those words and they're different when you think of Richard Branson. When you think of Richard Branson, you think audacious and private island and
windsurfing.
Windsurfing, exactly. And so a personal brand is very distinct from a company brand. And as an entrepreneur or a consultant, you really should be thinking about how you're cultivating both. And often the personal brand bleeds into the company brand because you and your company become intertwined. And when you're an entrepreneur building your own company, that means that you'll probably be intertwined with the same company for as long as you own it. But for people who are working for a consultancy or who are working for a bigger company, building a personal brand is crucial because at some point you're going to either be laid off or you're going to be looking to make a move. And the only thing that's going to set you apart from a giant pile of resumes is that personal brand that you've cultivated, whether it's content that you've put out or speaking engagements that you've done or just any thought leadership that you've built up. So whether you're an entrepreneur or you're someone who's working for a larger company, a personal brand can help you stand out. It can help you build up leads for your company and build up awareness for your company, but it's certainly very distinct from your overall company marketing strategy.
You know, one of the things that we as entrepreneurs and small business people do, we feel like our first attention should be to our website. And unfortunately, with a lot of us, that's where it stops. So we figure, well, we got some nice looking website. Take us through some of the things that we should be considering beyond simply doing a website as individual solo practitioners or small to medium-sized consultancies.
Think about a website these days. How often do you come across a company or a service provider by going to their URL? It's more likely that you're going to interact with them on social media or you're going to see an article that someone at the company wrote, and that's how you're going to arrive at that final destination. And I think most people think of their website as the be-all and end-all. If I have a website, people are going to find me. Maybe I'll put a few bucks into Google AdWords or Facebook ads or SEO, and then I'm good to go. And I think there's a lot more that goes into driving people to that website. And that's where, you know, personal branding and thought leadership can really come into it. So a great example of personal branding would be articles that you've written on your area of expertise that are published in industry blogs or publications. So, for example, as experts in the Apple consultant space, you're probably talking to people every day about how to fix their Mac products or how to outfit their company with the best suite of products for their needs. You probably don't even realize how much of an expert you are in this space until you talk to somebody outside of it and realize, holy cow, I'm actually, when I step outside my bubble, I have a lot to say. And if you actually distilled that into 5 or 10 topics that people wanted to learn about, whether that's 5 keys to setting up your Apple products in your company or 5 keys to troubleshooting your MacBook or whatever that is, there are lots of industry blogs and publications that would happily take that content. Media companies are very starved for content. So all it takes is really sitting down, thinking of those headlines, writing a few articles, and then getting them published on some of those industry blogs. And then you have a really great way to drive people back to your website without actually having to build up that audience yourself. Because buying Google AdWords is very expensive, and SEO can also be expensive and takes a long time. But getting an article published on a blog that already has a really engaged reader base that comes there every day for that type of content is a much easier way to drive people back to your site, and it doesn't cost anything.
Yeah, Jerry's been actually very successful in that. At least as far as I can tell, Jerry, I've seen you quoted in various articles when Apple releases new products, or there's something in the news to speak of regarding Apple. You're oftentimes asked for commentary, and then that includes a link or at least a mention of your name and your website and your company. Do you want to give our listeners a behind the curtain there, how you form those relationships and you get those comments out there?
Truth be told, that was just the luck of the draw. I initially was contacted by one source from a digital publishing company in the Northeast, and then a writer for Forbes saw that and then reached out to me. Since that's happened, and that was probably about 12 months ago, there hasn't been any follow-up since. So there have been times where I've been used as a source, and that was, I don't know how initially they found me or they were able to reach out to me. And there probably would have been ways, had I been speaking with Erin, to kind of capitalize on that and sort of keep that momentum going. But basically, the calls stopped. I think I was giving pretty good quotes, but I haven't gotten any recently. Maybe I had something there. I have fish on the line and I lost it. What's a good way to kind of keep that momentum going, Erin? If you are quoted in Forbes, or I believe the source that quoted me was a company called CRN.
Well, and Jerry, I think you bring up a really great point, which is you saw the value of building that personal brand, building that thought leadership around your area of expertise, but only because it happened to fall into your lap. And I think that's really what I try to encourage people to do, is to actually be more proactive about it and create a strategy around it. So instead of crossing your fingers and hoping that a journalist reaches out to you at some point to ask you about, Apple's latest news, what I suggest is, actually come up with a plan of attack. Think of the 5 to 10 publications that you would want to be quoted in or featured in. Figure out who's writing about Apple for those publications. So say, for example, you wanted to be featured in TechCrunch and you know that they have a writer devoted to Apple. Send them a note. Introduce yourself. Say, I'm an expert on all things Apple. Here's why. Here's what I'm great at. If you ever need a source about Apple, I can be available anytime, anywhere. I can do phone calls. I can give you email quotes, whatever you need. I'm on call for you. Introduce yourself, try to establish that rapport with them. And then when Apple news comes out, send them another quick note, or when you write a really great article on your blog, or, try to build that rapport over time so that you're on their radar, and that when they're writing an article, think if from the journalist perspective, they're looking to get comments quickly when something of news comes out. So if they know they can call you and get a quote in 10 minutes, they're going to come to you continually. So I think, like you said, when that Forbes journalist reached out to you, the best thing to do would have been to send a note, every couple of weeks or every month after that saying, hey, just wanted to make sure that you saw this Apple news, wondering if you're looking for someone to comment on it, or, hey, I wrote this blog post about 10 things to watch out for at Apple's upcoming press conference, thought you might be interested. It's really cultivating that relationship. And I think that's really what the strategy is when you're trying to become a thought leader who comments in the press, is who do I want to be covered by? Who's the best person at that publication? And then how am I actually going to go about building a relationship with them? Maybe they're in your city. Maybe you can run into them at events or ask them to go for coffee. And if not, it's more likely that you'll have to get on their radar on social media or by sending them emails. And I'm not saying stalk them, find a relevant way to reach out, but it might even be worth reaching back out to that Forbes reporter and saying, hey, I know you reached out last year. Are you ever looking for someone to comment on Apple news? I'd love to chat with you again if you ever do. All is not lost, Jerry.
That's good to hear. That's encouraging. So the skeptics that are listening to all this are saying, okay, well, this kind of sounds interesting. It sounds like it's going to take a little bit of hard work for me to do this, to come up with some articles that are eye-catching. Can you speak to the return on investment? Obviously, you're going to be building up your name out in the public eye. Does it translate into more work for your company or your business?
I think it absolutely does. The reason I spend so much time on personal branding personally is because I'm not a cold caller. I'm not a hard salesperson. I'm really a relationships person. So I run an agency and I have to worry about pipeline and leads coming in the door. And I've seen firsthand that every time I'm featured in an article, every time I speak at a conference, I always have people, even after ACES conference, reaching out and saying, hey, I need help with my personal branding. Can you help? Or, hey, I know you do PR. Our company needs some PR help. Can you help out? So I think personal branding, I've seen firsthand, has absolutely led to leads for our company. It doesn't just drive leads into the top of the funnel. It also helps once you're one of 3 or 4 consultants that they're looking at using. Who are they going to trust? Are they going to trust the Apple consultant who's been quoted in Forbes and who has a blog with over 50 posts on really interesting topics that they've been reading for 6 months? Or are they going to trust the person who has a website but isn't Googleable, doesn't really have a name out there? So personal branding also helps when you have a warm lead, and it helps to kind of close the deal because it adds legitimacy, it adds trust. And ideally, if you're building a relationship with someone over time, whether they're following you on social media or reading blog posts or seeing your name in the news, or they've seen you speak at an event, you've already done a ton of the work for them. They already know that they want to use you. It's just a matter of closing that deal. And I was actually, I was at another conference in Boston called Content Marketing Conference. And there was a guy there named Josh. He runs an agency out of Shanghai. And he was saying that he wrote a column for Forbes, and he wrote one article. His agency does specifically paid Google and SEO and SEM. And he was saying he wrote an article about the 10 questions to ask an SEO agency before you hire them. And that article he can attribute back to over $1 million in sales alone because it got so much traffic to his website and it drove so many leads that they can actually pinpoint it down to $1 million in sales. I don't know how they did that, but it's definitely it's a good speaking topic.
And so how does one get started? So I've got a nice web page. Where's the first place I would look? And let's focus just a little bit on the technologist, the person who's doing either Apple consulting or Apple repair, that type of person that would typically be listening to the show. What would be the cornerstone or the building block?
I think the first thing before you even figure out what you want to do is to be realistic about your time and your strengths. The biggest hurdle I hear entrepreneurs talk about when they're talking about personal branding is just, I don't have time for that. I'm out doing Apple repairs all day. I'm running my business. I'm managing my team. I'm doing the finances. I don't have time to write blog posts or do things like that. So I think, first of all, figure out, can you actually set aside time for this in your schedule? And if not, who's going to handle it for you? So are you going to get a marketing intern, or are you going to get someone on your team right now to help you carve out time for this? Or can you get a virtual assistant to help you build some of this, or use a freelancer on Upwork? So I think it's, first of all, understanding, am I going to be the person to actually do this? And then second, do my strengths fit the types of things that I want to be doing? So for example, I'm a journalism grad. I love writing. I love speaking in front of people. So for me, it's very natural to write articles and to do public speaking. But if you're a super technical person and you might have, an engineering degree and not a journalism degree, you might be sitting there thinking, well, I'm not a strong writer. So you also have to recognize what's a fit with your strengths. So if you're not a writer, or if the idea of public speaking terrifies you, figure out what those ways to build your personal brand or your thought leadership are that aren't necessarily getting up in front of a stage of 500 people. And that might be becoming a judge at a local hackathon, or mentoring people in weekly office hours, or commenting to media. So you're not actually having to write anything. You're just speaking out loud, doing webinars or video series. I mean, you can think of a million ways to kind of build your thought leadership, and it should really match your strengths. So I think it's being honest with the time and being honest with your strengths before you even set out to do anything.
And then once you achieve one of those goals, then you leverage that. You might put maybe a small blog post that says that you were a judge at the hackathon, or you do have this video series that's coming out on video editing.
Before you even get to what those things are, though, I think you also have to think about, what is your personal brand going to be around? If you think about Martha Stewart's personal brand, it's all about, home decor, and she's the ultimate hostess, also a jailbird, but that probably wasn't a purposeful part of her personal brand. If you think about someone like Cesar Millan, his brand is all about pets and communicating with your pet. I mean, even Richard Branson, his brand is all about risk-taking and entrepreneurship. And I think that's really what you want to sit down and think about, is, what is my personal brand going to be? What are the words that I want people to think of when they think of me? What are my areas of expertise? And I think, saying, my expertise is, I'm an Apple consultant, so Apple is my expertise. Well, you are competing with hundreds, if not thousands, of other Apple consultants across the country. So is there a subcategory of that you can really own? Are you the MacBook expert? Are you the expert on transitioning from PC to Apple? What area of that can you really own that you can talk about that 9 million other people aren't talking about? So for me, that's really key, is figuring out what your niche is. If there's already 25 people in your area writing the same kind of content as you, why would a journalist want to go to you over someone else? So having a niche and having a specialty is really key. And then I think you have to think about the channels that you're going to use. So we talked about having a website. Most consultants or service professionals will have some sort of website that they can drive people to. But what about your personal website? Do you want a personal website that you can drive people to? Or are you just going to have a really great polished LinkedIn profile? What social media channels are you using? Not for your business, but personally. Are you someone that hates social media? Maybe you shouldn't have them. But if you do like social media, are you using Twitter or LinkedIn? And how are you using those networks? And then what else are you doing to build your thought leadership in terms of content? Are you writing articles? Are you creating videos? Are you doing, are you answering Quora questions to help people in the community? And then, what are you doing offline in your community? Are you speaking at events? Are you judging events? Are you doing office hours or mentorship? So I think it's, after you figured out what your niche is, it's what are those delivery methods that you're going to use to actually get your message out there. And I know all of the things that I just said sound really overwhelming. And I think the key is not to try to boil the ocean. Pick a couple things and do them well, and set out a timeline to change these things slowly over time. So maybe just start with doing an overhaul of your LinkedIn profile, making sure you have a really clear, succinct description and bio and making sure that you have that nailed down, and then, move on to your social channels, then move on to content. So it is a process. It's not that you have to do it all overnight, but that's kind of the strategy for getting it going.
Yeah, it all sounds pretty overwhelming when you lay it out like that.
I know we're linking to a workbook in the show notes that kind of helps guide you through this process. So hopefully, if you are really overwhelmed, take a look at that workbook, and it kind of helps guide you through the process of where do I start? How do I set aside time for it? What should I focus on? So hopefully that's helpful.
And that's what your company does, right? 88, I could come to you, single member LLC, and you could help me strategize and come up with some ways that I can market myself that will at least get me on the right path. Because I think we kind of flail around for a while. We do a little bit of Facebook. We might have a Facebook company page, and we do some posts, and we don't really see, it's hard for us to sort of figure out what our return on investment is on there, in terms of our time. And then we might do a little Instagram, and we kind of bounce around and we dabble, but there's no strategy. There's no marketing plan. It's just throw stuff against a wall and see if any of it'll stick.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of times that's what marketing is when you're an entrepreneur. We do the same thing at 88. It's very much, okay, we're going to try hosting an event and see if that drives leads. We're going to partner with other agencies and see if they can drive us referrals. We're going to try speaking at events and see if that drives leads. So just like your company marketing plan, yes, you should sit down and actually have a plan. What are you actually doing, and what delivery channels are you using? You should also have that strategy for your personal brand. So, what am I doing? And then the key, I think, like with anything, is to measure it. I mean, we kind of take a look at every time a client comes in the door or we get a new request, we always ask them, how did you hear about us? And sometimes it's, I saw Erin speak at an event. Sometimes it's, I read your blog post. Sometimes it's, I was referred to you by a former client. But I think that will also help you see where leads are coming from and measure what's working and what's not, so that at the end of the year, you can kind of sit back and say, here's where I should focus more efforts. And if you find that, say, you're spending a lot of time working on those journalist relationships and you get 5 people at the end of the year who said, well, I read your quote in Forbes and I knew I had to get in touch with you, that shows that it's working and that you should invest more time in it. So it's hard as an entrepreneur to find time to market the company. And then it's even harder to set aside time to market yourself. But I would say that if you're like me and you're not great at the hard sales, I mean, if you love cold calling and you have that down pat, I'd still argue that there's a benefit to building your personal brand for those thought leadership and trust and legitimacy reasons. But if you're an amazing cold caller, maybe you don't have to place as much effort on it. But for me, I know that if I don't hustle and build my personal brand, I'm not going to have any leads coming in the door. So it's really key.
Let's take a moment to thank our sponsor for this episode, Jamf, makers of Jamf Now. You can find out more at jamf.com/CCP. Jamf Now lets you set up, manage, and protect your Apple devices in minutes.
Apple device management can be time-consuming work, even if you're an IT specialist. Make iOS and macOS device setup easy so you can spend more of your valuable time with your customer. Jamf Now is a cloud-based MDM solution for iPads, iPhones, and Macs in your workplace. Device management is fast, accessible, and affordable, so you can support your users without the help of IT.
It's as simple as going to jamf.com/CCP to get set up with your first 3 devices for free, and you can manage them indefinitely. You can also add additional devices for only $2 a month.
There's zero startup cost. We recently got a call from a healthcare provider. We hadn't worked with them before. I was called into the director's office, and there, sitting on her desk, was no more than 40 iPads, some locked, some they didn't even know the password. Everything was in a jumble. And she said, I want to know a way that I could manage these devices without having to hire a separate company to do it or buy extra hardware. The perfect solution was Jamf Now. Prior to our visit, we had them enrolled in the volume purchase program with Apple. Within minutes, we were unlocking and enrolling these iPads into the Jamf control panel. There's zero training, so I was able to sit side by side with the customer. There was very little learning curve, and she felt fully comfortable administrating the iPads once we got them enrolled. And then when we were able to push out applications to it through the VPP program, it was like magic. It works seamlessly. It was a perfect solution from people who have earned the trust of Apple and are one of the most respected names in mobile device management. The customer was delighted, and they have continued to be devoted Jamf users.
Wow, what a great case study, Jerry. A great example of how you leverage Jamf Now for a big win with your client and has ongoing benefits to them. It's easy for you to support on an ongoing basis as well. Once you get it set up with Jamf Now, some really cool things you can do is you can leverage Apple's device enrollment program, DEP, which lets you do a no-touch setup. So you can actually have a device ordered by your client automatically set itself up with your Jamf Now account for management right out of the box.
Once we saw the power of Jamf Now, we signed up for their affiliate program. Every time we make a referral or we enroll customers with a Jamf Now product, for each paying Jamf Now customer, we get a percentage of their monthly bill. No tricks, no gimmicks. They pay and we earn. That's pretty awesome and a great way for you to build your Jamf Now client base.
I would encourage our listeners to check it out for themselves at jamf.com/CCP. That's jamf.com/CCP. Set up your first 3 devices and manage them for free forever. You can add more devices for just $2 a month, and it's a really great way to get started. And you can see just how Jamf Now can benefit you and your organization and even your clients as well. I remember hearing advice when I was starting out and in the first probably 5 to 10 years or so. One of the pitfalls of running a small company like mine is that it's really just me and my clients are my clients. They're not clients of some company that I'm building. And, that limits the long-term value of the company. If I were ever to resell it, it limits even my ability to grow, or at least it did, initially. Going from one to more than one person is a real challenge when I'm so heavily identified with the business. When the business is me and all my clients know just me, they're not thinking about my company as a brand or as a bigger organization than just me. And when I bring somebody on, they can't see how that person kind of fits into the bigger picture. They would rather just work with me. So that was kind of the challenge early on. And, really throughout, for a lot of people, business is so heavily identified as being basically, you as the individual entrepreneur. So coming from that angle, I guess, speaking in broad strokes, how would you guide, let's say, an individual entrepreneur through that transition, not only to build his or her own personal brand, but also to build a company brand that's distinct from that? And how do those two things kind of play into each other?
That's such a great question because it's so true. Even Richard Branson started Virgin by selling records out of the trunk of his car. And everyone probably did want to work directly with Richard for the first, 5 years of the business until it just got to be too big. I was listening to a podcast called Masters of Scale, which I love. It's all about entrepreneurship. And Sheryl Sandberg from Facebook was talking about how she used to manage 9 people when she started at Google back in the day. And within a year and a half, she was managing 2,000. You at some point have to train your clients that they don't always get access to you. And the best way to do that is by not having it be your name Inc. from day one. It's having it have a brand like MacWorks or like 88 and training the team that I'm going to be delegating work to you. And after we get to a certain point, I might not even need to be involved in the process. The best thing that we did to kind of train clients that they didn't just get to work with me was hire a business development person. And obviously this isn't possible for every really small consultancy. But I think for us, it's been really helpful because, yes, I'm well known in the Toronto startup space. Clients come and they say, well, I want to work directly with you because I know that you know technology PR and that you're going to be the one to help with my personal brand. And that's just not feasible. So by taking myself out of the equation and having our business development person handle those initial meetings, handle all of that kind of hand-holding, they never expect to work with me. They don't even know that I exist in some cases. So that's been really helpful. But I think it's also focusing on, if be honest with yourself when you start your business. And if you know that you want it to be just you, that's fine. If you know that you just want to be a solo freelancer for the rest of your career and you don't want to scale it out, then it's totally fine to have a company name that's synonymous with your name and to never extricate the two. But I think if you have a goal of building it out into a 5 or 10 or 100 person shop, you have to realize that your personal brand and your company brand need to be 2 separate entities and that you are not going to be able to work directly with clients after you get bigger than about 10 to 15 people because you're going to be busy with the day-to-day of running the business. That's a key thing to think about from day one. And same with if you build a personal brand while you're working at a company, you're very synonymous with that company. But as soon as you leave, your personal brand follows you. It doesn't stay with that company. So anyone who's working at a company and not necessarily running their own business, that's why it's so key to have a personal brand because it follows you wherever you go.
And you're right in saying it's so key to do this from the beginning to make the business distinct from the individual, because it is really hard to separate those things and it gets harder over time. The other example, besides just actually operating as a business entity name and not just the individual's name, is not to ever give your clients your cell phone, as we've talked about on the show before, because if they are calling you directly, it's very hard to retrain people to say, don't call me, call this other number, and then you'll reach me. And they're thinking, well, then the original way was a shortcut. So like, why would I do what's harder for me? So if you never give your clients your cell phone and you actually operate with a business phone number, whether it's forwarded to your cell phone or they have to press 1 to reach you or whatever the case may be, it's a lot easier to scale that system as time goes on. That was a lesson I had to learn in practice as well. It is funny too, as you grow, when, as you mentioned, clients are sort of used to working with you and they're seeking you out. Oftentimes they know of you, or they maybe even been referred to you personally by an existing client or friend or whatever. Sometimes hard to direct them to one of your employees. And it's really funny because, as you mentioned, they'll say things like, I trust you, I know you. Doesn't that imply that if I'm going to hire somebody, that person is trustworthy? If you trust me well enough to work with me, you should trust my judgment in who I hire. But it is very hard to retrain people until you just reach a tipping point where people get to know other people in your company, and then they get more comfortable working with them and seeing the infrastructure that you've put in place, and then things kind of fall into place from there. But yeah, it can be a long road. The sooner you start, the better, in my experience, for sure.
For sure. And I mean, a great example of this is it's up to you as the entrepreneur. Just like it's such a great example of giving out your cell phone number. It's so true. As soon as you do that, it's like the kiss of death that, they're going to be trained to call you at all hours of the night. I was the one internally who kind of handled a lot of our startup and technology PR. That my background was in that. I had a lot of relationships with the journalists in the Canadian tech space. And I hired a full-time guy named Jamie, who now runs all of our tech PR internally to work with me on it. And at the beginning, he didn't have a lot of the relationships. He didn't have a lot of the brain trust around tech and startup landscape in Canada. And, clients were maybe a little wary about going to him for questions instead of me. But now, fast forward 8 months later, he's more well-versed in the scene than I am, because he's the one talking to journalists every day. He's the one that's the point of contact for all of our clients. And really, we've just been able to kind of train all of the clients that Jamie's the best person to go to. You actually don't want to call me, because Jamie's the one that's out there at events and talking to the journalists daily. And I'm the one that's out of the loop now. So he's the best bet for you to go to. And it did take 6 to 8 months to probably, train that behavior, and also to get Jamie up to the speed where he can be replacing me. But it's been a pretty seamless transition. And I think, almost being self-deprecating and saying, I'm not the best person anymore. I'm working on running my business. My employee is the one who's actually in the weeds and who's up on every single Apple nuance. And they're the ones that you should be looking at, not me.
It's so true. I remember an example that my first full-time employee, Tim, shared with me. When he would go out consulting, at some point, a client's comment was, Joe who? Took a slight offense to that. Joe who? Like, who am I anymore? They practically don't even know I exist, but that's exactly how I wanted it. I'm not intrinsic to the business in their mind as much anymore. That was a good tipping point. As other people in your organization gain more experience, they become more desirable, and the clients just slowly catch on to that. You can almost implement part of that directly by being less available. If they get a response more quickly from someone else in the company and they get a good result, they pretty quickly stop caring whether they get help some other way. What we did was I just became less available because I was doing other things, and I would be scheduling farther out in advance. So clients would almost begrudgingly at first work with someone else, and then they had a good experience, and they would just, that sort of encouraged that behavior a little bit more quickly.
Definitely. Well, I mean, it comes back to that idea of, do you want to be a solo freelancer, or do you want to actually grow your business beyond yourself? And I work with an agency consultant named Carl Sakis, and he's awesome. He's based out of North Carolina, and he specifically works with agency owners to help them kind of optimize their business. And he always talks about this concept of making yourself needed but not necessary. Your role as the owner of a company, whether that's an agency or a consultancy or whatever it is to be needed. You want your team to need you there. You want to be providing value to the business, but not necessary. Because if you got hit by a truck tomorrow, or something happened, or you wanted to, exit the business, you need to know that team is going to run well without you. And so if you can't take yourself out of the business for a 1 week vacation, and you can never picture yourself leaving it full time, then you really have some work to do to get to the point where you're needed but not necessary. And a lot of that is training clients, but a lot of it is also you letting go. And I love that story that you mentioned about your ego taking a bit of a hit, because it's true. The first time a client doesn't know you exist, it's kind of like, oh man, do I even matter in this equation? But the answer is it's actually good for you not to matter in the equation. It means that the company's running well without you and that you've become needed but not necessary.
Right, exactly. It's working. You asked the question, do you want to grow where you're a larger organization, or do you want to possibly remain what I would call a boutique consultancy, one-man shop, one-person shop? I think it's a good question to ask because it's not really for everybody necessarily. And sometimes people, I think, assume that they should grow to large staff or a large company, and that's just the natural progression. But I think that there's a lot of benefit to just remaining small and nimble, sort of, single person company. There are definitely drawbacks to that, and I faced that decision and made the decision I made, but there were certain benefits to it too. It's just a lot simpler to just do everything yourself, not have to worry about scale really. It's worth asking, but I guess I'd be curious what your advice would be to a company who decides to go in that direction, or I guess an individual, remaining just a one-person operation. How do you maybe make the business distinct from yourself? Is it even worth doing that or important to do that in that case?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, on the whole note of should you want to scale, I think it also depends on what you want to be doing day to day in 1 to 5 years. Like for me, I love the management side of it, the operations, the finance, the marketing. And I only do about 20% of my time is spent on client work these days. 80% of it is spent on managing the people and managing the business. If you're someone that wants to do 100% client work, that's probably a pretty easy answer that you should remain a solo freelancer or consultant and not necessarily grow to a point where most of your day is not spent on client work, it's spent on management. Say you are a solo consultant, you really do have to sit down and think about whether you want it to be tied to your name. Is this something that you want to be able to step back from in 10 years and sell to someone? Because if it's Erin Burry Inc., it's not going to be very easy to do that when your name is tied directly to it, right? Same with even naming your company. A lot of people, especially in the agency world, lean towards naming their company with part of their last name or part of their name. Well, if you ever want to sell that business, it's going to be hard for you to step back from it, knowing that your name is on the masthead and on the website and on the business card. So I think that's the first thing you have to think about is, do you ever picture yourself stepping back from this business? And if the answer is yes, I would probably give it another brand, something like MacWorks, where you can actually build up a brand around that. And if you ever decide to step back, that's okay. If you see yourself being tied to this forever, you also want to kind of combine your company and personal branding efforts into one thing, then it's a great idea to do Erin Burry Inc. Because then you don't really have a personal branding strategy and a company marketing strategy because you are the brand. If I'm launching Erin Burry Inc. tomorrow to become an Apple consultant, I'm making one strategy. It's about how do I get in front of as many people as I can? How do I make myself an expert because I am the brand, right? So I think that's really the difference is, do you want it tied to your name, and how closely tied do you want your name and the company brand to be?
I love listening to Erin because she's mentioned MacWorks at least 4 times now. And I haven't heard her say the name of your company once, Joe. So
don't worry.
Who's counting?
Erin, I just wanted you to touch on, we as consultants, we like to put on our tinfoil hats and we like to separate our business from our personal lives. And you seem to manage this so gracefully. You have to build up your personal brand at the same time you're building up your company brand. And a lot of people are very fearful of that crossover or that cross-pollination of, something that I shared out on Facebook or Instagram somehow affects what's going on. I mean, should we be very careful with all our social media that we put out there, whether it is personal or company branded? I guess I answered my own question, so the answer to that is probably yes. But how do you balance that? Because you seem to do it very successfully.
Well, thank you. I don't know if that's the case, but I think for me, it's, if you think about the people that you enjoy following on social media, they're probably not stiff business-focused salespeople all the time. You're probably following them because they have, interesting takes on current events, or they're hilarious, or they give you a glimpse of their personality. So I think the first lesson, if you do decide to use social media as one of those tools to build up your business or your personal brand, the thing to remember is don't make it 100% sales-focused all the time and inject some personality into it. And then the second tip would be focus on making some of your social networks your business-focused networks, and then having those personal networks where you really do focus on friends, family, and personal updates. So for me, I would say Twitter and LinkedIn are my more business-focused networks. So they're where I share articles that I've written and, events that I'm speaking at and all of that kind of stuff. Whereas my Instagram and my Facebook are more like the pizza places I'm eating at and the spin class that I'm doing and the photo of the palm trees in Phoenix instead of maybe the link to my talk at ACES. So I think you just kind of have to figure out which ones you want to keep personal and which ones you want to keep business. But of course, there's some cross-pollination. I mean, I do post a lot of business-related stuff on my Facebook because I have a lot of friends, whether they're clients or past clients or people that I've met in the startup community who I am friends with on Facebook. So it is definitely a balance, but I would say I get way more interaction on the kind of fun personal stuff that I post on Twitter than I do on my carefully crafted marketing article tweet. So definitely make sure to inject some humor and personality into it.
And on that same topic, do you put a lot of gravitas into, a lot of people talk about engagement. So like on Facebook, if you get a like, or on Instagram, if you get the hearts, do you put a lot of weight on those types of interactions, or do you find that that's folly to think about that?
Well, I mean, to me, we talked about, how do you know if anything's working? You throw all of these things at the wall, you put all these things out into the ether. How do you know if they're actually giving you any return on investment? And to me, engagements or interactions on your social media posts are an indication that people like the content that you're putting out there and want to see more content like that. So I don't think you have to pay attention to it. And, if you don't get more than 10 likes, you're failing this month. But if you do post something and it gets a ton of retweets or it gets a lot of, comments on Facebook, why did it get that many? Is it that, it's your birthday and you got 1 million comments on your Facebook wall? Well, that's pretty obvious. But maybe it's an article that you posted that just happened to be really timely and got shared by the right person. So to me, it's more just a barometer of, am I putting stuff out there that people resonate with, both on the personal and the professional side? Same with your company website. I mean, if you're putting out a lot of blog posts and you find that one got 2,000 views and one got 20 views, that's a good barometer that 2,000 view article resonated a lot more with people, and you should be putting out more content like that. So, I'm a journalism grad, I'm a words person, I'm not a numbers person, but to me, you don't have to be a data scientist to pay attention to those types of things and just to be in tune with what you're putting out there and whether it's actually resonating with people.
A lot of great information. If I was listening to this and I was really excited by the things I was hearing today, how can 88 help me? And can we reach out to you and your company to come up with a strategy for our companies?
So great question. It's funny because 88, until recently, we didn't focus on personal branding. It was just something that I've been really passionate about. I've tried to evangelize personal branding to my employees, to people I talk to at conferences, because I've seen the success it's helped me have in my career and with my business. And so it hasn't really been something that we focused on as a service at 88, but we focus on marketing and PR and thought leadership for companies. And increasingly, we're getting executives at those companies or solo consultants coming to us and saying, I really do need help with that personal brand. So is there something that you can offer outside of the traditional marketing you do for companies? So we've just recently started to put together some personal branding packages, which include everything from, if you're in the Toronto area, obviously it would include things like getting a headshot done in person. But if you're outside of that area, it would include things like helping you develop a personal website or helping you develop a speaking topic. So if you do want to speak at events, we can help you put together the content and design the presentation, drafting blog posts and figuring out what you should be writing about, helping you develop your strategy in your niche. So all of those types of things that we talked about today. So we're just kind of putting the finishing touches on this personal branding package. But yes, if someone was interested in personal branding, they could definitely reach out to me. And I also do weekly office hours. So if it's ever something that, you're listening and you're like, oh my God, I just need to talk to you for an hour and figure out where I can start and tell you a bit more about my business, I'm always happy to do that. So, shoot me an email and I'm sure we'll put it in the show notes, and I'm happy to set up time.
Excellent. That's a great to leave it here, to leave listeners encouraged and interested in reaching out to find out more information. And I'll also just mention the website address is 88agency.com. And of course, your personal site, Erin, is it erinburry.com?
It is, and don't judge it. It's a very old WordPress site. It's like the classic shoemaker has no shoes syndrome of I need a new personal website.
We're well aware. I've been having some internet troubles for the first time in about 5 years since we moved into our office, and it's one of those things that keeps getting pushed to the back burner. So I get that. That's a great place to find out more about what you've done. Listeners will be able to check out one of the case studies you have here on your site that I think you mentioned at ACES. agency or porn. I thought was kind of a funny, I guess, game. Now, what was the format of that, just to give people a little bit of a tease here? Is this like was it a site where you'd go and see a still from an agency and it seems to be related to porn in some way, but it's oftentimes an agency's pitch?
The way it actually works is we notice that a lot of agencies have names that are kind of euphemistic. So grip or huge, for example. And so we turned it into a game where you have to decide if something is the name of an agency or the name of an adult film. And it sounds easy, but it's actually really difficult. So if you go to agencyorporn.com, you can try it for yourself. But I would warn you that there are sound effects and people have gotten in trouble by playing the game in elevators and other crowded spaces. So just make sure your sound is off or you're playing it in the comfort of your own home. But yeah, it's harder than it sounds. And also a lot of ad agencies have names that sound like adult films. So I definitely learned a lot. And my senior designer definitely has some questionable search history after researching all of those.
That's pretty funny. We've had that come up with, speaking of the questionable search history, when trying to demonstrate that a content filter is working for a client. It's always a little bit like, first of all, we hope that the content filter is working, and also sorry about having to load a page with this address, but we just need to make sure this is working.
Yeah, you're like, honey, this is part of my job. I wasn't on Pornhub because I wanted to be. It was right. Research for a client.
Exactly. Thanks again, Erin, for joining us on this show. It's very informative. I think will lead to a lot of listeners going a lot of different directions for their own personal brand and company branding. It's a great topic of conversation for people, I think, as well. And thanks for coming to ACES. It was great to see you there, and maybe we'll see you at a future one as well.
Yeah, well, thank you, Joe and Jerry of SciMac and MacWorks. I'm going to say both of them so we get the shout out. I really appreciate you guys chatting today. I know this might be a little out of the realm of the type of content that your listeners typically listen to. So I hope that it was valuable and that it gave them something to think about.
And we will include the link to that workbook that Erin mentioned. So check our show notes for that if you are intrigued by what we've been talking about today. Excellent. Thanks again, Erin. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Of customers of all kinds. Am I on the cloud? Joe spins